Okay, welcome to another Synth Hour. Time it's a little different. We have a guest, Cryss Synthient of Synthient Sound. He's got a nice YouTube channel, and he's a regular host on the ProSynth Network. And he's also a regular guest on the Geosynths show, which I'm also a regular guest on there. So Cryss and I go back a little ways, but it's more like in passing because whenever we see each other, he's doing a show or we're doing a show together, but we're not the hosts. So it's like over to you, Cryss, over to you, Aaron, but it's never between the two of us. So I decided it was high time that we had a proper conversation, Cryss and I. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And Cryss is going to be kind of the topic of conversation. We're going to chat about music and just see where it goes from there. So without further ado, Cryss Synthient, how are you, my friend?
Doing well. I've been looking forward to this. As you said, we get to talk regularly, but not as much time to talk together. So yeah, I've been looking forward to this, and yeah, things are going well. We're just coming up to Christmas, so it's been busy, but this is a really nice little breather.
Yeah, so something tells me that your life is a little busier than mine. I fly solo and I visit some family, and that's about it. So I don't have to decompress from the holidays, thankfully.
Yeah. I try to keep things as solo as possible, but with parents and stuff, you gotta go see them and all that.
Those pesky parents.
Damn them.
No,
actually, I've got good parents, and they've been very supportive about everything. So,
yeah, that's it's funny. I'm sure you can relate. Whenever I start talking about music, the eyes of whoever's there just glaze over because I can talk music for 4 hours straight without breaking a sweat. And I don't know any musicians in real life. Everybody I know is, you guys are on the internet. I've never stood toe to toe with you. So it's, that's another thing that I like about this community we've got going here.
Yeah.
So to kick off the conversation, what I wanted to ask you, Cryss, is when you think about your musical journey over your life and try to roll that back to the earliest memory, like when did you get exposed to music, or when did music touch you in a way that you're like, hey, I think I like music. I think maybe I want to try and make music, because that's totally different than all the other people who hear music and listen to the radio in the car and all that stuff. But most people don't think, well, I want to make music, or how did they make that music, or what guitar was that on that track? It sounded amazing. So I wanted to hear you talk a little about that aspect, if you could.
Yeah, I my parents, I think dabbled in music, but by the time I rolled around, they didn't play anything. Or, my main exposure to music was my mom listened to oldies radio, and then I had some friends' moms who listened to like 80s pop music. I was born in the late 70s.
Wait, when you say oldies, can you pick some?
Yeah,
what were those decades on the oldies channel?
Yeah, so for her, that would have been the 50s and 60s and 70s type stuff. And so that's what I kind of grew up hearing, at least when we're traveling in the car. And if I think back to my earliest memories, I always kind of liked the more rock stuff out of there. So, and those oldie stations would play a variety, some of it was R&B and some of it was, classic rock and roll and stuff. And I guess the more rock and roll stuff always appealed to me even when I was young. And as I was getting a little bit older, I remember, way back when I was just in elementary and stuff, I always wanted to play the guitar and the saxophone. That was back in the days, like the 80s, where saxophone was still kind of cool.
Kenny G. I had a Kenny G album.
Well, oh, see, now these are the dark secrets that we were talking about. I did have a Yanni album.
Oh, yeah. I think my mom bought that one, but yeah, that was a Yanni, and Kataro was another early influence of mine.
So it's funny, but I remember even watching, like, if you remember this, they had these what was it, the California raisin commercials in the 80s.
Yep. I used to have
Yeah.
a sweater of the California raisins, a white sweater with the California raisins on it.
Yeah, and so there was the dude playing the saxophone. I thought that was about the coolest thing I had seen. And then, got to play saxophone in elementary school, and so my parents bought me one.
So
And
your
then,
school had a pretty decent music program.
yeah, I mean, it was okay. I think, like, if you were serious about it, I mean, well, I'm talking fifth grade here, and I was, and so I practiced, and I really just got bored with it. It wasn't because it wasn't interesting. It just, the whole school band moves so slow, and I think that's probably, I mean, that's one of the only classes I really remember getting in trouble in, and so I gave it up, and then
Define trouble from the perspective of cryss synthient.
yeah, probably talking and goofing off or something.
Okay, so like you weren't shooting rubber bands or doing cherry bombs in the toilet or anything.
No, not in fifth grade anyway.
Okay.
So after that point, like, my parents wouldn't buy me any other instruments, and I was like, well, by that time I figured out I really wanted to play guitar, but they were done. And so thankfully it was like it's like a afternoon. We went over to my great aunt and uncle's house, and my sister was the only other kid there, and just bored out of our minds, old people talking, boring stuff. And my aunt had in the closet this old guitar that was her son's. And so she pulled it out because she was not my favorite person in the world, but at least in that moment, she had some compassion and pity upon me. And so she brings out this old, kind of junky electric guitar and says, "Hey, do you want to play with this?" Like, yeah. And so I sat and I played with it the whole afternoon, not knowing anything about it, or, just like, wow, this is a cool thing. She said, "Why don't you take it home?" And so that was the summer before high school that I got that guitar. And, this is back in the early 90s. And so it didn't have any internet or anything. So went to the store, bought some books, Mel Bay chord books. And, and I at that point, I mean, I think as kids do, like, you just kind of listen to whatever your parents do or whatever other kids think is popular. And so, which at that time was, oh man, like late 80s, early 90s, whatever, pop and rap and stuff like that. And I'm like, so I was wholly unequipped to start playing guitar because I didn't listen to any guitar music.
That's what I was just going to say. I don't remember a lot of guitar in any of the popular music during the 80s and 90s, back when I still listened to popular music.
Yeah. I there's so I had this kind of problem, like, well, I need to play guitar. I want to play guitar, so I need to listen to some guitar music, and I just didn't really know any. The only thing I could think of is like, well, on the oldies station, there's some old rock stuff that I like. I got to figure out what that stuff is. And so I would ask my mom, like, hey, what's this band? And so I just kind of discovered that I like the Beatles. And so just ended up with some chord books and would sit on the curb out front of the house and like try to just teach myself guitar. And that's how it was for quite a while. And I think it was the first albums I had were some of the Beatles stuff. I think it started with the early Beatles. I'm a really big fan of the mid to late Beatles now, but it started with the early Beatles and the Metallica Black Album, and it kind of filled in between those.
Those sound like pretty diverse. Those are very different, both different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
I was going to ask, what kind of guitar was this? Was this like a little, $60 guitar that you would pick up at Bi-Mart or whatever store there was at the time? I assume it was acoustic.
No, it was an electric guitar, and it was a. Oh, I still have it actually. It's a 1965 Framus Strato, which was, I think, a German company. They've come back in more recent times, but it was kind of a weird copy of maybe like a Fender Strat and a Jazzmaster and a Les Paul, like all kind of mashed together, and it had even at that point, it was pretty old, and the neck had warped a bit, so
Oh, wow.
the action or the distance between the strings and the frets were really high, so it was pretty tough to play.
Yeah.
And but it worked, and the amp that's if you can see behind my microphone here, that's a 1965 Standell Artist, which I recently acquired, and I have a video that on my channel that I go through. I play for the first time in 25 years that original guitar and the original amp that I had. I played them together because the amp was never mine. A neighbor drove by and was like, you just see me playing on the sidewalk, just sitting on the curb playing.
Yeah.
It's like, do you need an amp? You have an amp to play? Like, no, I just have this guitar. It's not even acoustic. It's electric. It's like, yeah, hold on. I'll be back. And he comes back, and I'd never met the guy. He lived up around the corner from us, and he brings me this amp. Like, yeah, use it as long as you want. I know the guy that lives across the street, so you just let him know if you're done with it. And so I played that for a couple of years until I had saved up enough money to buy my own amp. I thought that was just,
Oh, that's
supremely cool of that guy. And then it was last year, I think, about a year and a half ago or so. That same neighbor of my parents called me up. He's like, hey, you remember that old amp? So yeah. He's like, hey, Paul's going to sell it. Are you interested in it? Like, yeah, sure. Well, what does he want for it? It's like, is it going to be worth it? Because it would have some nostalgia to it, but I didn't know if it would sound good or not because it's been 25 years. And so, yeah, $100. Like, yeah, I'll take it. And so, I met up and got the amp and got to play it again. I was like, this is a great sounding amp. It's got some really nice old Jensen 1964 Jensen speakers in there, worth way more than what I bought it for, but just for the nostalgia and then it ended up being a really great sounding amp too. So that was kind of fun to play those like original guitar rig that I had all together.
so.
But
Now,
yeah, those.
So that was a 1965 amp, you said?
Yeah. Both actually. The funny thing, the guitar and the amp were from 1965.
Okay.
And I've always had, I remember just from the beginning, and I'm sure you did identify with this as well, is that there's something in my head. Like I know other players that were like, they just get a guitar or a keyboard or something, and that's just the one that they use, and that's just what they always use. And there was something in me that like was really attracted to gear. Like, I want to try stuff. I want to play this. I want to build this stuff. And so that same, the neighbor that lived across the street it's like kind of like an uncle to me, really close to the family. And he worked for a company that built robots. In fact,
wow.
as Motoman, and their claim to fame was that they built the robot that killed the original Terminator. If you remember that factory scene that crushes the Terminator.
So it's like industrial robotics kind of equipment then?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he needed electronics. So he's like, you need some distortion. I was like, yeah, I need some distortion. And so he built me a fuzz box. And my everybody now these days, we're talking about, vintage guitars and vintage synthesizers and stuff. But I mean, the funny thing is that my first rig was really a vintage rig. I probably didn't appreciate it enough at the time.
Yeah, you're like, what's this old yard sale stuff? Oh, well.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, does that amp now, would you say it has like a sought after tone, or is it kind of a tone from that era? Is it a good quality amp? If somebody was looking for an amp from 1965, would they look in the direction of that amp?
Yeah, it was like a really expensive amp in its day
Oh,
because it was
wow.
one of the first solid state amps. And usually, I mean, I play all tube stuff, and this is like the exception, the one exception that I have. But it was done with all germanium transistors before they moved to silicone, and it was a rather kind of high end boutique company that was doing stuff. So it
Wow.
has a phenomenal clean tone. You know, unlike a tube amp, if you crank it up, it's not going to give you like a sweet overdrive to it. It's pretty much a clean amp, but it does have a really great tone. And they're not really super known these days. I mean, the Fender and Marshall stuff
Yeah.
is known a lot better, of course.
So that's cool though, because I mean, one of the things as a musician I try to do is sound like other people don't sound, because
Uh,
it just helps you stand out that much more, or just that uniqueness. So it sounds like you're not going to bump into a
oh
lot of
yeah,
guys that are playing through that thing.
yeah. I very much felt like the same way, and even when it comes to players that you like and you emulate, because I've known some people that were like they've got that one player and they just sound like a clone. And I always thought it was good to learn people's styles. And I spent a while not as much working on note for note stuff, but stylistically, what is it that makes Brian May or Eddie Van Halen or Eric Johnson or whatever? What does it make them sound like the way they do? And then what parts of that do I want to kind of take some little part of that into my playing? But yeah, I'm not really into, and there's some tracks I'll do where I'm just goofing around. I'll be like, okay, now I'm gonna do this track like Jimmy Page, or I'm gonna do this like Eddie Van Halen, and it's just for my own enjoyment. But yeah, kind of the same way. Like you got to try to find your own tone. I mean, how is it that you kind of approach that to finding your own tone?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think this came up in a conversation during the 4-hour Geosynth Marathon, which, if you're on YouTube, you can check that out. That was recently a big show there. But the way that I put it, and this is the way I often put it, is you start out emulating what you like, and
Yeah.
as you're emulating, you start to enjoy emulating certain things more than others. And then when you
Hmm.
take a step back and work on your own stuff, those emulations kind of blend together and form something unique. And the longer you continue that process, eventually, I've essentially lost the desire to emulate anybody, and I'm totally doing my own thing, but it sounds similar to what other people are doing and have done.
Uh-huh.
But that journey started with emulation, with me straight up recreating Final Fantasy music in GarageBand note for note as best I could. That was, the very beginning of that journey, which,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's similar to you getting a guitar and learning to play songs out of a songbook or listening to them on the radio. What I was going to ask was, so what was the step from you sitting on the curb as a kid? You finally got the guitar, you got the amp, and you were just kind of playing familiar tunes. Where does it go next from there? Because when you say a kid, are you talking like 10 or 12, 15?
Like 14 years old, I think, is when I started, or somewhere, yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah, so those are the pretty formative years too.
Hmm.
So what was the next step in your musical journey there?
Yeah, I'm not. So for maybe another year, I just kept really working on it myself. I didn't know anybody, and then at the high school that I went to, I mean, there was a couple other guitar players, and this is during kind of when grunge got big. And there was another guy in particular that had lessons and started earlier than I did, and so he would just play whatever popular song was on the radio at that time. Smells Like Teen Spirit or whatever, and I just remember being like so revolted by it. It's like he's just doing that for popularity. Like he's not a true artist.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
doing what he. I mean, I was so
You were
critical at the time.
a cork sniffer from
Yeah.
birth. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, he was doing what he loves, and I don't have any problem with it now. But I remember back in the day, I was just like, ugh. But I met another guitar player. It was a guy that was 13 years older than me, so he would have been in his like late 20s. And he had a band, an alternative band, and he kind of took me under his wing. And so a lot of his work also, which involved helping people, like I would go along with him, and then he would, we'd be playing stuff together, and he'd eventually started showing me some things. And so that really, playing in bands, like he started at the church that we went to, he had started this thing all the way in the back of the church, like where other people really couldn't hear, but it was just for like the college age kids. And it was actually a band. And so this place was kind of old school, and so this was something I had never experienced. And one of the great things about it is that I got to play with these college kids. I was just a high schooler, and I learned like the fundamentals of how to play with a band and music. And it was kind of tough at first. And I think at the beginning, he didn't really want me to be there, but
Yeah.
I was fortunate that his sister took compassion on me, and I think would yell at him afterwards if he was really tough on me. But it also kind of, caused me to make some jumps, and I got to get better at this. I really got to push it. And then instead of just hearing stuff on records or CDs, like to actually see somebody do it and go, okay, I think I can do that. Or it's even to be able to ask, like, how did you do this thing here? And so that really made a big difference for me. And then, just playing in bands in high school and stuff. Eventually with that guy that I was telling you about,
Oh, okay. Were you doing any Nirvana covers later?
No, we actually were writing our own songs, which was cool. But yeah, he ended up being the rhythm guitarist and singer, and I ended up being the lead guitarist. So we were both like very happy and satisfied in that.
So the group with the college age kids, would that be considered a worship band?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Okay. So, and it sounds like that was maybe early on, because I know worship band, I don't know what you would call it broadly, has taken off, and it's really big now. But I don't remember hearing much about it at all until around where I live. It was like the mid to late 90s. You'd start seeing it and hearing about it. So it sounds like this is kind of early on.
Pretty early. I mean, that was like probably 93 or so that I started playing with him. And he was a guy that was not really, too deep into the church scene, but was, wanting to do something that meant more for his life. And so his kind of doing that stuff and volunteering, but then also doing the rock band stuff was great. And then it influenced the kind of stuff that we got to play as a band when I would play with him.
So were you playing his compositions, or was there, because I guess I don't know that there would have been standard worship tracks that people would commonly play back then if it was that early on?
There were, as I recall, I mean, there was stuff coming out, but so I remember doing some of his songs, but then some standard stuff, and kind of everybody just did however they wanted. So it ended up being kind of, I mean, as far as like, what did it sound like? It was like a pretty like moderate rock, alternative rock kind of sound to it, I guess. And which was good, because sometimes like it would vary in style. I mean, sometimes we'd be doing reggae stuff, and other times it's like alternative rock or soft ballady type things, which kind of pushed me like, oh, I've got to learn these other styles, or what's appropriate to play in something like this, because it wouldn't be copying some other guitar player's part. I'd never heard the songs on an album. It's just like, here's a chord chart, or lead sheet, or whatever it is. Like, you got to make up something for it. You just know the chords. That's it. So that ended up being really helpful to me in the long run, because I wasn't so confined. I could actually be a little more creative with it. And then, as I started getting into buying effects and using those and implementing them into my style, it did really help me out.
So it sounds like a pretty ideal learning environment for you and a melting pot because you're getting all this exposure and at the same time you've got this guy who may be a little tough on you to so you're like, okay, I gotta make him happy. He yelled at me because I screwed up too many times today or whatever, which that can actually be a good thing to, you know,
Yeah.
have.
And it did turn out to be kind of like that. It was like at the beginning, it was a little bit, it was tough, but then, after, within a year or so, like we just were really good friends, and then, really good influence in my life, and kind of pushed me because I'm, with the stuff that we here do on the internet. I mean, I know you and I are very introverted guys,
Yeah.
and I'm not shy. Like I've done lots of public speaking and obviously all the shows and stuff, but to have the kind of to push up the energy level to go and interact with people is a little bit harder for me. So he was definitely one like, hey, just do this, put yourself out there. Don't worry if it's perfect. You just need to go and do it. And that's something that I've still struggled to this day. In fact,
Yeah.
a lot of my like crazy, just oddball music that I'm doing that gets put on YouTube is not anything like what I would say I normally write, but it's just the experiments because I'm not so emotionally invested into like my dream album. I can't do that yet. I honestly cannot do that because in my head it's so great. I'm so worried that when it gets out that I'm going to disappoint myself.
Yeah.
It doesn't end up being like that, but that's my strategy of it has been, okay, I'm just going to just do whatever. And I'm going to explore styles that I don't know what it is, or I'm going to mash things together funny. And I'm just going to make something new. And if somebody doesn't like it online, it doesn't hurt my feelings. Like I was having fun. I just need to spend time creating music. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, he definitely helped push me in that direction.
Yeah, no, that's great because that's often a hurdle, especially depending on the tools you're using and possibly your background. Some people get this idea, especially in forum arguments. Well, it's got to be perfect, and then when you put it out, everybody will, bow to you and acknowledge how perfect it is. So nobody puts anything out because they don't want to put it out and be ripped to shreds. But once you get over that, and like you say, if you're not so emotionally attached to it, then you can just be yourself and be creative and do whatever you want to. And, just put it out there if you want to put it out there. And if people like it, they like it. And, because often we're our own worst critics.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I've learned that I really value somebody who will give me a straight impression of whatever they're hearing, Mm-hmm. So I've got a few people that I can go to. It's like, okay, what do you think of this? And they'll be like, it's a little boring and meandering. I like this section. I don't want a yes man. I want to, this sucks because of these reasons and it's cool because of these reasons. I can do something with that. I can work with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it sounds
because
like
it's constructive. Yeah.
You got to learn about that process in there too. So what I wanted to ask, so often with a guitarist, you'll hear, and you kind of touched on it, they have this certain gear that they really like, and it develops into, what do they call it, a pedal chain or a guitar chain, when you've got the amp, the guitar, and the pedals, and every time you play with that stuff. What do they call? What's the name for that they normally call that?
Well, I don't know. Like, so what my
rig, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess people call it different things. Like, so pedal boards have become a big thing. After the end of the 80s and which had kind of worked itself up into the height of digital, just as it had in synthesizers, you'd have guitarists with refrigerator sized racks of digital gear, and then the kind of backlash of that is kind of where I entered. And so getting back to old fuzz pedals and vintage gear and that stuff, like I said, the guitar industry hit that about, it's at least my perception of it, it's about 15 years before the synth industry hit it. I mean, it depends on what genre and different things, because of course, like people went back to the 808s and stuff like that real early, but um, the guitarists got all of a sudden really clued onto like, oh well, Jimi Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan, and so then it really became about like, like, oh, I want to put together a board, and so I've got a few different boards actually, just depending on what kind of gig I would be doing or what I would
Okay.
be, so like I have a smaller one that's become more my main gigging one just because it's so portable, but I've got a really back behind over there. I've got like, I don't know, a 4 or 5 foot long behemoth, which it has tons of stuff all over it. And then it's just permanently set up. I mean, permanently, like, because you buy stuff and you switch it out, and
Yeah.
just like you do with your just like, or like we do with our Euro rack. And I mean, really it's just the same thing as Euro rack, really. Different instrument.
I learned that. Yeah. But so you didn't start out with a 4 to 5 foot pedal board. I'm wondering
No.
when because the guy that helped you out with the amp when you were on the curb said, hey, you need distortion on that. So at some point the pedal journey began and it morphed into something where you ended up with a pedal board. I'm curious about how that progressed for you.
Well, it would have progressed really quickly had I had the money, but the bummer about high school and working during high school is that like all of a sudden you need a car, and
Yeah.
you got to start planning for other things, and that became kind of like, oh man, because I really want to get the rest of this guitar equipment sorted, but then I've got to pay for gas, and my parents were good. They were like, hey, you need to be a responsible adult
Got
and
to mow
live
lawns
your
or
life.
deliver papers or deliver
Yeah.
pizza or something.
Yeah, so that's what I did. So it was a little bit slow, but yeah, I mean, just slowly over time, I would build up. The first guitar that I bought was a nice American Strat. I just waited. I could have bought a cheaper one, much sooner, but I decided I'm just going to save up and wait and get the one that I want. And, just starting to buy pedals, get different effects, see what they do. As we all do, we experiment. How am I going to use this one? I mean, some of the first pedals I had were like was a Crybaby Wah. I had the homemade fuzz, and I remember buying a Boss Metal Zone, because at that point, like, I need as much distortion as possible.
Can't have too much distortion.
Yeah, you can't. I was like, every song I listened to, that sound would be better with a lot more distortion. And sometimes I was right, but yeah, I mean, our tastes refine over time. We start to find the nuances of what sounds good, or you show up to a gig with a Metal Zone, and as soon as you turn it on and a full band is playing, it's just like, shh, you can't even hear it. It doesn't have enough mids to cut through the mix. So there was a lot of experimentation. By the late 90s, myself, my best friend, and my mentor, like, we decided, hey, let's make some pedals. And so we chose an old fuzz circuit that was easy. I mean, it's like, think this friend had just got the internet, so we looked up some schematics online, late 90s, and like, okay, we're going to build fuzz faces. And out of the three of us, I was the only one to get one to work. So I ended up finishing up my friends. So like, oh, I kind of like doing this, and it really appealed to me. And this, I really became about my identity. I mean, we all have that kind of thing, like, what is my musical identity? What's the gear I'm going to use, and what's it going to say about me, or what's the music that I'm going to play or I'm going to write, and what's it going to, how's that going to express what I'm about? And so all of a sudden there's, I said from the beginning, I was really into pedals and gear, but electronics. A neighbor showed me how to solder, started building fuzz pedals, changing out pickups, and it became like, I'm going to add these switches to my guitar, and, people are going to think it's cool because I've got all these things that are custom that nobody else has, or I'm going to build these pedals, but I'm going to tweak them slightly. I'm going to change this capacitor. I'm going to change this tone, and it's going to be something that's uniquely mine and nobody else's sound. And it just ended up being something that was fun. And for a long time, even when I was working as a musician, that money as an adult, it paid the bills. But then the kind of the hobby of it was always the gear, and so um, I've built dozens of pedals, and I've rebuilt amplifiers and fixed more things than I can count, and that was a kind of I would get a lot of stuff off of eBay, or there was a back then it was called the Recycler. It was like a print little print newspaper print magazine type thing,
like a
classified
free
ads
at the store kind of place. You could just pick one of those up in the checkout line or whatever.
Yeah, kind of like a Craigslist. I don't know if I think you'd have that up there too, but private ads. You would actually call in and talk to somebody to put the ad in.
Yep.
Back in the olden days.
Back when we used phones.
Yeah.
But before we go much further, can you share with us the most disastrous effort at one of these little projects of yours, whether an amp or guitar pedal or a guitar? Like if you had something just go horribly awry and maybe there was smoke involved and some profanity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always those things where
it sounded like you were experimenting like crazy and you had a little wild imagination at work there.
Yeah, I mean, there was things that there was a few things that I just ended up breaking worse than what they already were, and like just making mistakes. I mean, most of the time I bought stuff myself that was broken or that was old and then fixed it up and resold it. And that's what allowed me to invest in more gear. But then that would be my risk. But for a while I was taking in repairs. And so like that, where is it there? The Mutron Phaser 2 that I have there, that was one that I more recently fixed. But I would get stuff like that, like there's a probably the most major guitar forum right now called the Gear Page, and people would contact me and they're like, hey, I've got this old phaser or something that's not working. And I'm like, oh, yeah, let me see if I can fix it for you. If I fix it, you owe me this. If not, you're out one-way shipping. I'll pay the shipping back. And unfortunately, those situations all ended up working out, like where I was able, like far beyond what my electronics knowledge really is. Because I mean, I'm really a hobbyist at it. I haven't taken classes or anything. So a lot of it was, I either need to make this work or I want it to sound a little more like this. And so I would just have to do the research to figure out how am I going to accomplish, how am I going to make it work. And most of the time, pretty fortunate about it. But yeah, there was a few mods that went bad on some things, like lost some pickups trying to monkey add coil taps and stuff like that, or just some sad things like that.
So I'm guessing you tested it out well enough so you didn't end up on stage at some point with some custom stuff that you had done yourself and have it fail catastrophically or anything like that.
Yeah, no, fortunately, no big catastrophes. There was, for real serious stuff, I would take backups. And then ultimately I end up with my pedal board setups, I have kind of a dual chain on there. So I can bypass with one looper foot switch. I've got basically a rhythm and a lead chain of effects, and the bonus to that is that if something in one of those chains goes down, I can actually just still use the other chain and just reconfigure it a little bit. I mean, I've blown amps on live situations like where you sound goes away and you look back and you see smoke rising out of your beloved gear and you're like, no. But usually at those situations I would have backups that would be able to swap in pretty quick. But fortunately, most of my mods I've had didn't have any problems with, and I'm not the greatest. I'm not going to be starting any gear making businesses or anything now. But so I guess I would consider myself fortunate in that regard.
Yeah. Let's see. So, as far as I understand it, you regularly play in a band now, correct? Or you have a regular group of guys that you play with?
Not anything regular at the moment.
Well, I mean, obviously not right now because you're in California State, and that they're got a pretty serious.
Yeah, of course. Aside from COVID, so the stuff that I was doing, um, some of the projects involved a friend that has passed away about actually a year ago,
Oh, okay.
almost exactly. And so he still worked in the music industry. He was a bass player for Katy Perry and Avril Lavigne,
Oh, wow.
and played on a lot of tracks. I mean, it was kind of funny. He was like this all tatted up, listened to Tool and stuff like that, and he played for pop stars. But we did a lot of work together, and that was fun. But he passed, and then the only thing that I've been doing lately is my wife and I are some friends of ours that kind of go way back. I just knew him from gigging around here. Our friends started a Beatles tribute band, and so at one point, like they were kind of a smaller band, and they needed some more people to play for a gig, and so they invited us, like, hey, do you want to come play? And so my wife would play drums, and I'll play lead guitar, and we gotten more gigs doing doing that stuff with them, and it's just purely for fun. And so that's something that's kind of kept things going. I at this point don't know a whole lot of people that are musicians I could play with. I mean, like as you said, everybody I know now is online, and so even you're relatively close compared to everybody else we know.
Yeah, you're the closest guy I talk to.
Well, whatever, like 1,000 miles apart,
At
you're
least.
still,
Yeah.
I think Marshall's one of the closest, and he's all the way on the other side of the country from us. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a bummer because I would like to go out and play. I don't play synth very much live because I'm just not mechanically as good as it yet. It was something that I took up much later in life, but I would love to go and play guitar, and maybe even these days drag out a synth to play on the side or something. But even after COVID gets done,
just not that one in the frame there, though, right?
Yeah, that's not going to go out. maybe that one.
Yeah. So on the topic of synths, where did synths enter the frame for you musically? Starting as a guitarist, because I don't hear. I mean, I haven't listened to rock music and metal and all that stuff in a while, but I didn't hear a lot of synthesizers when I think back. So where did that come into the picture for you?
Yeah, I mean, when I started playing guitar, I remember hearing tracks, whether it be contemporary of the 90s or going back to 80s and 70s stuff, and those tracks that would be like they would try to shoehorn a synthesizer in there, like
because they were popular and you had to have
faux,
ARP was selling them to everybody.
Especially like that kind of late 80s sound where they would try to get it into the rock music, and it would make me mad. Why would they do that? That sounds awful. Stop ruining rock music.
Get off my lawn. Okay.
Yeah. But the synthesizer work that really attracted me to it was actually through classic rock bands that were experimenting with synthesizers. And I had never heard of, usually what like a lot of our friends would talk about, like, oh, I loved Kraftwerk or
I didn't grow up with any
Gary
of that
Newman.
Stuff. Yeah, I didn't hear.
They weren't on my radar, and so it was actually bands like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd where they were starting to use synthesizers, or The Who. I mean, Pink Floyd was probably the big one for me. The lead at the end of Welcome to the Machine was one of the first tracks and also Led Zeppelin's In the Light, where I was just like, this is amazing. I really like this. And I remember beginning to find out about synthesizers in the 90s. And I remember maybe in the late 90s thinking I needed I'd like to go buy a Mini Moog, but I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't know anybody that played. And what few keyboardists I had played with at that time, it was all like Rompler stuff. So they didn't know anything about an analog synthesizer. But I started learning. I mean, by the time I could actually use somebody's internet, I didn't have any for a long time. I would look up and find out what was being used on these famous tracks. Like, oh, I really like the sound of the Mini Moog. And I discovered I also liked the sound of Oberheim's. So like listening to 1984 by Van Halen, although I've always hated the song Jump. I don't just was never.
It's a good thing I didn't mention it.
Yeah, I mean I appreciate it for what it is. It's a great pop song and it's well done. But the title track that people seem to forget off that album, which is the track 1984, where it's just Eddie playing the Oberheim. And that was another one that was just like these cool filter sweeps. And I didn't know what the heck that was. I didn't know anything about the technology of it. But to me, that was the good sound of a synthesizer. I just didn't know anybody. And so it was kind of put off. And then in the early 2000s, I ended up buying a Juno 106. And I remember, I think I got that.
Now, was that before the Juno became the hot item again? So you didn't have to pay a fortune for it at the time?
Yeah, it was really cheap. I mean, I think I got it for about $125.
Oh, yeah, that's dirt cheap.
And I sold it for $275, and I thought I'd just hit the jackpot. I was like, somebody wants to take this off my hands for $275?
That's still dirt cheap.
Those were the good days, and I kind of feel like in the synth world, I've missed out on a lot of those deals because, there's a lot of people that bought up those great classics that they would never be able to buy them again because they've skyrocketed so much.
Yeah.
I mean, the Juno that I have now is probably, it's worth, I mean, conservatively 50 or 70% more than it was when I bought it. And I bought it a few years ago. So these prices have gone crazy. And I've got some really cool guitar equipment that I don't think I could buy again right now. But, if you're lucky and you're looking for those things at the time, but at the time, I mean, that's probably my greatest musical regret would be that I didn't get into synthesizer earlier. But again, just what was popular at the time, if you're not into that scene, you just don't know. I mean, and again, what was popular
pre-internet.
Yeah. So I missed a lot of stuff because if I had started back in the 90s, I'm sure I would have had a Mini Moog, an OBX, and maybe like a Jupiter or something. Like we all dream about what we would have bought back then. But
I'd have a CS80 and a spare in the back shed for parts. Yeah. Oh man. So you got the Juno 106, you said?
Yeah.
So how did that play in? Because it sounds like primarily you were a guitarist and you're still a guitarist. So you buy this synthesizer. Were you able to integrate that into any of your band performances?
No, I never did.
Because I don't know what else you would have done with it unless you had like a tracker of some kind. And back then those weren't easy to get something. I mean, I don't even know where technology was at. You weren't using a DAW.
Yeah, I mean, I had done computer stuff. I had taken some college courses on recording back in the 90s. But yeah, for myself, I didn't do I was so busy doing live stuff for a long time. I mean, I had an old Tascam, was it 424, 4-track cassette tape recorder type thing.
Yeah.
And I would do tracks from time to time at home. I think it was all, I was putting in the work on live playing and on being a musician, but really, I think in the back of my head, the goal was like, I want to get to the point where I just sit and record. And that was always the goal. And so when I pick up gear, sometimes it's like, I want to have this thing for when I start recording, or I want to have this. And the Juno, I think, was like that. And I don't even remember where I got it. But I had this thing, I didn't have the internet, but it's one of those synthesizers. Like if you know nothing about synthesis, it's one of the best ones that you can
Yeah,
get to start
that's
playing
a
on.
really good
And
place to
so
start.
I had no idea what an envelope was, but I just sat and played with things until I figured it out. And so I knew none of the theory behind it. I just like, okay, I see how what this does to the sound. Oh, okay, the saw wave sounds like this. The square wave sounds like the. You know, I mean, just really simple stuff. And eventually I sold it, but then just kind of a couple of false starts really with synthesizers. And I had bought about 10 years after that when the King Chord came out,
Mm.
and it was a virtual analog. And I bought one of those. The guy that I was playing with that was a keyboardist. You know, he had been playing for decades, and I mean, I didn't know at the time, but he had a DX7 and a Juno 60 at home,
Wow.
and this guy was just a phenomenal musician. Played with just tons of, you know, like, you know, the Temptations come into town. They call him to make a band for them, that kind of stuff. And he was just unbelievable as a player. But the same thing, like he played a Rompler. Like that's all I ever saw him use, just some like, you know, motif, Yamaha motif or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm going to get into this. But then, you know, the interface on it, it sounded great, but the interface wasn't there. I just didn't have the time. I was always so busy with everything. And I went back to school and just didn't have the time. So it was really probably, I don't know, 2017 or 2018 that, I mean, and during these times, like I was recording, like, you know, you had talked about GarageBand. And when that came out, I was already on Mac. So I would do stuff. I had a MIDI controller, but most of my work was, or most of my recording would just been MIDI controller using soft synthesizers for a long time, which worked great. And I thought that was enough for me for a long time. And still to this day, I mean, there's so many good soft synthesizers that even if you have some really cool piece of hardware, like I use them a lot because they sound so good these days and they're so versatile. I don't have to have that piece of hardware, but I will buy the hardware that I really want. And so by that point, like where I had really started getting serious about, okay, I'm really going to dive into synthesis, to the point that, I mean, in the time that you've known me, I know I'm often referred to as like, oh, Cryss is a guitarist that likes synthesizers, but that's not how I would describe myself anymore. I mean, that would have been me for many years, but I would say like, well, I'm a guitarist and a bassist and a synthesist. And actually, I spend most of my time with synthesizers now.
Mm.
I still have a lot of guitars, and of course, on my tracks, like I'm always, you know, experimenting and trying to put all these different worlds together into the music. But when I decided to get serious about sound design, then it was like, okay, I need to buy hardware. I need to figure this stuff out. I mean, I knew how to do it, but I wanted to like devote a lot of time, which before I wasn't willing to put that time into it. So once I did, then it was like the floodgates open, and
Okay.
I just went down that rabbit hole. I mean, to the point, like, you know, after I had been doing that for a year or two, then I'd get on the guitar and I'd just be so depressed because, you know, I wasn't upkeeping it like I used to upkeep it. And so, you know, it doesn't take me long to get back to the point that I was. Like, it does take, you know, some time spent in getting your muscle memory back to that kind of sharply defined thing. But it is a little depressing because in my head, I know what I can play. I know what I want to play, and I can see all that stuff still. But sometimes when I get on the guitar, I go and I flub it, and I'm like, I used to do that really well. What's wrong? For a moment, you know, you're just like, wow, what's wrong? And then I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so I'm going to have to work on this a little bit more before I record it. And so now I'm trying to find the balance, because I do spend hours every day with synthesizers that, you know, either sound design or recording, that I'm now it's the other way around, where I have to make a decision. Like, I've got that other instrument that I really love and I need to spend some time with it.
So, so it sounds like you've certainly broadened, and you're finding a new balance as you've broadened. And I've seen a few from the work on your channel. It appears that you're doing more of what I would call production. But that it sounds like is that kind of a new development, or did you start producing tracks, back in 2005 with GarageBand?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it was more back in the day. It was a hobby because I had so much work to do with live stuff. So the way that it kind of has played into it, I mean, did recording, but I was never an engineer or a producer or anything like that. But where I did have to spend a lot of time was with live sound. And so I did a lot of like band directing, arranging, band leading, fixing all sorts of problems because I tend to, I suppose, like at heart, I'm an artist, but I get along with technology really well. And so I like to be nerdy with it. I often don't sound very eloquent as I talk about that stuff, but the mind works a lot better than the mouth does. And so a lot of times when it would come to figuring out things, how are we going to do this, or why is something not working? I was often got to be the one to solve those kind of problems. And then with arranging, like having to teach other people how to play their instruments or do certain parts for whatever we were doing, or working with the sound man, like this is not sounding right. Like, how do we get this problem fixed? We're having this, and just again, having to do the research of, well, we have this problem. How do I figure it out? I have no idea. So, okay, let's play with this, or let's go. I'm going to go on the internet and try to read and take in the information that I need to, to solve a problem. And then, as the more problems that you solve, the more that you build on that knowledge, of course, and you figure out things. And you're like, okay, it becomes quicker and quicker about how to do that. So I think that those experiences kind of built up some skills, whereas I didn't spend a lot of time recording. And what you've seen on my channel so far is just me having fun. Like my goal has been, and going back to, it takes a lot more energy to get started on these things in the physical world. I really want to spend my time thinking about things. I want to trying to figure out whatever it is, how does this all work? Let's look at some, physics or some philosophy or whatever it is. I enjoy that kind of stuff. And that's what I've been good at outside of the music stuff. And so with the recording, not having been able to do as much of it, and having this like thing about my personality where it's hard to get this going for myself, my goal has been like, okay, I'm just going to sit down and do it, and whatever comes out and whatever weird experiment. And then it's become a little more complicated too, because I mean, before I was writing, I liked a variety of music, and I played a lot of stuff, centered in rock, but from blues to metal and different things. And then and then also enjoying ambient music as well. When I sat to start working with synthesizers, like, okay, I understand how things, tone works. Now, how am I going to do it in Logic and figure this out? And so all those like experiences kind of funneled into this, like, okay, well, it's different, but actually ends up being a lot easier for me than the chaos of live sound.
I got the impression that you certainly learned something about how to mix a track if you're arranging a stage to sound okay from the audience's perspective. Essentially, that's very similar. Ideally, that's how you would mix music on an album.
Yeah, I mean, there's different challenges involved, but I think with recording, it's a static environment that you have more control over,
Yeah,
where
I can
and
see
more
depending
time.
on your brain that could make it actually harder because you're like, okay, I get this blank slate. They could be playing in Wimbledon Stadium. Oh man, where are they all going to be at? And yeah, I could see how things could run away from you real quick.
Yeah, I think that's I'm at the point where I'm trying to get a lot of tracks done, not for an album, but just to experiment. Because I mean, with everything that I've gone through, like, oh yeah, I know the theory of all this. I understand. I don't have to enter into recording trying to figure out how a compressor works because I've been using them for a long time. And so that part's easy, but there's no matter how much you know, and the same thing with playing keyboard. Like, I mean, I've played keyboard on and off for a long time, but it was never anything serious. And so I understand how the music worked, or like, oh, well, here, this is how to play in Phrygian or whatever. That stuff's okay, but it's a whole different thing to go now. Make your hand play that Phrygian scale, that kind of stuff. And so it's just
To a beat.
yeah, there's no getting around the fact that you have to actually spend the time actually doing it. And so, some of the things that I come back to in this moment, and I'm going to say like this year or something, things that I've been thinking about. So some of my favorite albums this year and the things that I've listened to the most of other people's music have actually been Point Surrender and Imperfect, and in particular Point Surrender. And I'm being absolutely serious.
And
Focus.
I've transported to another dimension all of a sudden. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to be out of focus for the rest of this show here.
So when I hear you talk about like
There
your
we go.
recording process, I'm working really hard to go in the other direction right now because you talk about like, well, I spend all this time fine tuning it. Now you're productive because you're putting out albums, and but then when I hear you talking like, I listen to this and I keep refining it and working on it until it's perfect, and that's like, man, like, oh, that's where I want to be right now. That's what I want to be doing. But that's not the place that I can be right now, or that's going to be good for me. And I'm a little bit envious of that. And you're making these great albums, and I go, I know that for what I'm doing right now, this is where I need to be. But that's kind of the big goal. I mean, I'm going to keep doing the sound design, but when I've tried to reconsider things like what is this all about for me? Like, what's the thing that's going to keep me going? Because
Yeah.
music has been business, and it's also been fun, and it's also been a hobby. But what is the thing that I really want to do the most? Like, well, with the sound design, I'm already going to be doing that, and so might as well make some other people happy too, and have people enjoy these sounds. And that's an art in of itself that I really enjoy. And then, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like, man, I want to make music that I want to listen to,
Yep.
because there's so few things out there that I'm finding that I really want to dive into. And
Yep.
Bandcamp has just been wonderful for me, because that's really the only place I buy albums anymore, because the bands that I used to like don't make good music anymore.
Yep.
They're too big, or they're not hurting anymore, and they can't put that into their art.
Yeah.
There's too many yes men. And so where I'm finding a lot of musical enjoyment is like, man, all my favorite albums are made by my friends now. The stuff that you make, the stuff that Bob Familiar makes, or Steve Pierce, it's like all these fantastic musicians that I know that are making albums, in small studios, their house, their bedroom. And it's just an amazing time, because there's no record companies telling us what's popular.
Yeah.
We get to put it out and not have to worry about all that stupid stuff that goes on. What a fantastic time to be making music.
So, we want to wind down the interview here. So what I wanted to ask is, so you've kind of alluded to what you're working on right now, but I just wanted to ask, so what projects do you have going on now, and what are you thinking about in the near future?
Yeah, so I'm got this little thing going, synthient sound, and so the funny thing is that like it just so when I'm on the forum, my name's Cryss, which nobody spells right, but that's another issue. But
I promise to spell it right on this video.
we'll see, right?
Yeah, I'll have to run it by you before I release it.
No, in fairness, you're one of the ones of the people that do spell it correctly. But yeah, so the funny thing is like one of Ben's bandmates asked me, he's like, well, that's awfully convenient last name. I think what I told him, I said, yeah, but it wasn't when I was a guitarist. And so obviously it's my business. And so I created Synthient Sound. Again, it's this project to serve part of the art that I'm working on and my love. And then by doing that, that's what's going to help me to continue to get gear and that kind of stuff, because my other work involves helping. I've got a group of guys that kind of mentor and help them get their lives in order. And so that's a work I want to keep doing. I'm not involved with any nonprofits or anything anymore. And so it's just something that's just purely voluntary. My wife's a teacher. And so in order for me to keep doing this music stuff, like I don't want to go back doing the stuff that I was doing before. And so Synthient Sound, like, well, this is a way to share part of my art. Also, it'll be helping me to bring in some income, because I don't want to be spending our house money on buying gear and stuff.
Yeah.
And, hopefully this will be able to recycle itself a little more, like making patches and then being able to grab some of their synthesizers and make patches. And then also, not everybody enjoys doing that. You and I enjoy doing it. And we love finding those perfect tones. But not everybody likes doing that. They want to sit and they want to get to a preset, and they want to get to making music right away. And that's a great way to do it too. And I'll use whatever method works for me. So a lot of times I'm designing sounds, and I know you do this as well. You'll design a sound and kind of make a track out of that sound. It like inspires something. And hopefully the presets, the sound will be able to do that as well. But then other times, like I'm scrolling through presets from effects units or things, and most of the time I just fiddle stuff and make up patches. But other times, like I got a song idea and I need to start getting it down, and I'll just go and find a great sounding preset, maybe tweak it a little bit, and like that's that perfect thing. And so whatever method works. So yeah, I'm doing that, and I just have two sound sets out right now. I've actually worked on quite a bit more, but I've had the opportunity to get a hold of some synthesizers that I don't own. So I paused everything I was working on, and I did this Prophet 6 sound set. And right now I'm working on one for the Novation Summit, and those are from two different friends. So and of course you know this, but it's been wonderful because I've got both those guys. They're a guitarist and a bassist, and the guitarist, I got him into guitar 20 years ago, and then he got his buddy into music and playing guitar, and that guy owns my first Stratocaster still, so I still see it every now and then. But then gotten them into the synth world, and for a while they were like, I don't know about that, but now they're full into it, especially the one that it just like he has an incredible synthesizer setup now. And so the cool thing is that, they're not into the programming. And so they go, hey, will you make some patches for me? Like, yes, I will.
Yeah.
So that's been a fun thing. And I've been working on those. And eventually, still kind of waiting for Moog to sort out the software, because I've got a lot of patches for the Moog 1 that I want to release. But every update has been radically changing stuff. Still, it's still pretty young in its
Yeah,
cycle. So
that's a shame. So you're saying the updates are still tweaking it in a way that
yeah,
alters the patches
yeah, pretty
somehow?
significantly. Yeah, and they've changed a
Yeah.
lot of the gain
Wow.
staging, and so I mean, I about a year ago, I just finally was like, okay, I'm just going to hold off on this for a while. I'll use it for
Yeah.
recording. And I go, I've got other synthesizers to work on. And so I'm just going to go through and start making those. But I'm really like waiting to get back to this. And then overall, for myself, just to make music, to make albums, I'm enjoying the music that I'm making and trying out all these different styles and going, what if I did something that's this or that? But I think I would like to actually do two projects very, similar to what you're doing. And one project would be more very, hopefully it'd be the type of project that people that buy Point Surrender albums would go, oh, if you like Point Surrender, you might also like this stuff as well. And
Well,
so that would be,
if you ever want a remix or a little collaboration here and there, I'd enjoy
oh,
doing something like that
absolutely.
with you.
Yeah, I would love that.
Just
And then the other
put
stuff that I
that in the
wanted,
back of your head and bookmark it and get back to me
oh
sometime
yeah,
when you're ready.
yeah, we need to plan to do some stuff like that. And I think that would be fantastic. And the other thing I want to do is just to make like this heavy melodic rock that I like. So that'll probably be a later project, but there's lots of songs built up for that already. We just need to record them.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean that's the main stuff that I've been working on, and then of course the big project that's been taking time now is Pro Synth Network, and just been having a blast. I don't know how long have we been doing
Like,
being regulars on geosynths.
oh, well, it's been over a year. I know that. It's
Yeah,
really time's really flown by.
yeah. I mean, and that's how we got connected because you were already a regular on Jamie's show, and then he saw my Mogwai video doing the Blade Runner stuff,
Oh, okay.
and I was just like, oh, that's cool. I'm not anybody online, and I just sent him a thank you, like, hey, thanks for showing that. He's like, hey, why don't you come, I'll be on the show, and started doing that. And then Ben Simpson had started Pro Synth Network a little while later. So I guess it's been like maybe October of last year. And got connected with Ben and Robbie. And this year, with COVID and everything, I mean, there's already synth shows, and we've been on Jamie's show and stuff. And like, what if we did like of course, here in the United States, we have the late night talk shows, and usually have like the really famous guy at first, and then afterwards you have like the late show, and
Which
it's
is
a
always
little,
better in my opinion.
yeah, a little
Well,
more
back
rowdy.
back in the 90s it was.
Yeah. And so that's kind of how we thought about it. Like, there's a lot of people that are still hanging out that want to hang out and keep talking. And anytime that we go, and then, getting to know some other people like Ramsey, it's like people want to get together. We see the same people in all these different shows. And so like, well, let's just do a show and talk to people that we like and that we, talk about the gear that we enjoy talking about. And it's just taken off and been a really fun project, and it's something it's just for the love of it. And so the nice thing is, again, like getting to schedule people, and of course we've had you on and had all of our other friends on, and getting more that we haven't had on yet. And so it's been a neat opportunity also to talk to people that I otherwise wouldn't have talked to ever.
Yeah.
And having some really interesting conversations with all of you guys. So that's been fun. And so, I think that's about all the stuff that I'm up to right now.
Just a few things. And in addition to that, you're family man and all that stuff. So it's a lot of stuff to wrap your arms around. Well, Cryss, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me here. This has been a really nice time getting to know you a little better, get deep into your musical history there. For the folks watching, if they want to keep an eye on what you're doing and check out your patches and any music you're working on, where would they go to hear that and check that stuff out?
Yeah, they two places that you find me a lot. So my main channel, which is Synthient Sound on YouTube, and that's really where to keep up to date. You know, I'm not a I try to keep things regular, like regularly posting, but also I'm not super high energy, so I'm not putting out stuff every other day or anything. But that's where my sound design stuff is found. And connected to that is my website, synthientsound.com. And that's where you can buy sound sets. And that really kind of launched this year, actually, a few months ago. So I'm looking forward to 2021 because I'll get a lot more sound sets out finally. And then, of course, ProSynth Network on YouTube. And it started out of a Facebook group, which, again, if you just search ProSynth Network, you'll come across it. And we've had a lot of great people in the group. I mean, some crazy, like, top tier musicians like Hans Zimmer and some really cool people like Manny Fernandez or Howard Scarr, and just the amount of wealth of knowledge in that group is very stunning, and it's truly humbling to be a part of that. But we've got like there's some really cool people like that are Grammy winning people, and then there's a lot of just regular people who just passionately love synthesizers, and there's everybody in between. And then on the channel, we've done a lot of interviews with different interesting people. Recently, Dominic Hawken, Michael Whalen, Mick McNeil from Simple Minds, Aaron Russell, which is a great one. You should watch that one. That should be the first one that you watch.
I am not paying him to talk like this, just for the record.
I'm sorry, you're my friend and I'm your biggest fan, so I've got to brag you up a little bit.
Well, I appreciate it. So that pretty well wraps up our conversation here. Thanks again, Cryss, for taking the time. I'll have links in the description so you can get a hold of everything that he's up to. And what time is the ProSynth Network on, typically?
Yeah, Sunday, that would be 8 p.m. London, 3 p.m. New York, and noon for West Coast.
Wow, you've got that memorized better than I do. I just show up. So.
Well, gotta wait till YouTube reminds me. No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was really good talking to you. I sure appreciate it.
You as well.
Thanks a lot, Cryss. And we'll see everybody when we see you. Bye for now.
Thanks so much, Aaron.